Yeah, there's actually a lot of things to do this time of year. I'm going to wait till past the 4th of July weekend, see more weather, but this is where the market falls and everybody just hangs it up.
Hey, welcome to Hedge Heads, where we discuss the commodity markets, hedging, and anything related to trading futures. Remember, the risk of loss in trading commodity interests can be substantial. These are opinions only and not trading advice. While no one knows where the market's going, we're not afraid to share some ideas. I'm Ryan Tunkseth. He's John Prishman. Well, John, the 4th of July is upon us. We had a major report last week. It's summertime, or at least they claim it's summertime. It hasn't really felt like summer here in Minnesota yet. What are you seeing out there for weather markets? How is it affecting the fishing? Let's start with the important stuff.
Well, I think it's affecting my fishing. I usually only catch big fish, and now I'm only catching one every once in a while. Or that's the way I want it to go. No, it's actually probably helping because I actually caught a big fish instead of just talking about catching a big fish. But overall, the lakes are up. I not noticeable in the lakes, but noticeable in the river. Like rivers are way high, and it's too much water around here. That's the bottom line. You don't hit the ground at the boat landings anymore. That's nice. So you don't have to trim up for a quarter mile. So that's a nice change. The last 2 years, it's like an ottertail. I think it's about a quarter mile out before you can trim down. Other than that, no. I'm always chasing them. Like I say, I want the big ones, but I don't think they care much. They like the rain.
We talked earlier, there's not nearly as many people fishing this year as there have been the last couple of years. You and I are both lucky enough to fish some weekdays and weekends.
Yeah, you don't see the tubers, the wakeboarders. You just the busy summer lake. You just don't see. You see the pontooners; they never go away. But even those guys aren't as noticeable as they've been. You can't tell. Some people think it's the economy. Some people think it's the weather. It's probably a mix of both around here, but it does seem very, very quiet for what you would normally see for this time of year, for sure.
What's your take? Do you think it's economy starting
I think so.
to come in?
What's the cost to fill up a ski boat? I'm sure right around $150 with oil being up, especially, and then finding the time to do it when you have to go back to work to make sure that you can make all the bills, because obviously everything's gone up. I think it's a combination of both. It was started last 4th of July. I think you said that you just didn't seem as busy. And I remember being able to tube. We're on a small lake, and you could do whatever you wanted to on the 4th, and that's not normal. Usually you're on the lookout for about 1 million different boats from 1 million different directions. So it seems like it's just probably people with less free time, less money, and that would be one of the first activities that you cut out, would be burning a whole bunch of gas in the lake.
I forgot that we talked about that last 4th of July. Obviously, we didn't have a podcast at that time, so there's no recorded record. But now that you bring it up, I remember last 4th of July, we always fish in the morning. Then in the afternoon, we have boat parade and the usual lake stuff. And when we were out fishing, it was not busy that morning, which sometimes it's not. It's 4th of July, right? Guys are sleeping in.
Yep.
But even the lake, to your point, you could go tube anytime. You weren't waiting for other boats out there. You weren't waiting for traffic to clear. It was not busy. And
no, and the grains are behind. You're driving around, you can see they're behind, but they also look wonderful. So we got 80s coming up. A lot of guys are starting to get worried about, when you hear heat units, we need heat units. Generally, it comes. The bad news about this is everybody wants all these things to show up in these USDA reports right now. The flooding, the cool weather, the plant being behind a little bit in the north. And you go to the east, north and west is definitely behind. But the east is ahead, or at least on pace, because they've been much warmer and much drier. So you got a kind of a tale of two different things going on. But the bad news is it's really hard to measure that. If you look at what you've seen in the past, 2019, 2009, and there's been a couple of wet, cooler years in there, there's not a very good measurement for that as far as what the yield's going to be. So if you hear low test weights, generally that shows up in a year and a half after you start hearing that. So we got a lot of summer left. You can't panic about it. The markets don't seem worried one bit. I would say we're not at the ground zero for the worst, too much rain or, too much moisture, but we're not far away from it either. I meant we get rain often, and we could do without a little bit of rain for a while here. But that's what the bulls are hanging their hat on. And I don't know that the USDA is going to help them out anytime soon. And we didn't see anything in the report, which was the big report of the year. The surprise was 1.25 million more acres of corn than they thought. So what I didn't like about the report is I didn't see a lot of opportunity that normally a report something that wasn't there before the report appears, and there's opportunities in a few different directions. It was kind of the perfect report to really not have a lot going on. It's really hard to know what it's going to do through the 4th of July. I think we need to see the weather past the 4th of July weekend, which is going to be the 6th, it'll be 7th, I think, before we come back, or 8th before we come back from trading. Friday, the markets are open and no one's going to pay attention. But, that forecast, I think, is going to be pretty important. And if there's nothing in there for the bulls, I think they're going to have a harder time, especially in the beans. Corn's at a level now where we don't need to go down anymore. We move a lot of corn at this level last year, or even above this level price wise, but don't underestimate how much the funds can press a market. You never know what they're going to do, but they can push it much further than it needs to go. Beans, on the other hand, are hanging around at higher levels because the old crop's still, in shorter supply up north, down south, and then up north, I think, is where the beans are. But logistically, they need them down south. So you're getting a bid up front in soybeans that I think are kind of holding soybeans together. But all in all, I would say a dud of a report. Just no categories, no light at the end of the tunnel for anything. I think they find higher ending stocks for beans, corn, and wheat, which is unusual. There wasn't that big surprise that you normally see. And if there was any surprise, it was bearish.
That makes sense. As far as prices go, I mean, corn made a big move down on the report, but
yep.
There wasn't anything shocking out of the report. Nothing, like you said, no real opportunity there. And corn's now at a level where it could just sit here. It could. I mean, there's not a whole lot of, this is obviously wrong right now, unless you're a producer. Obviously, you don't want this to be the price or less going into fall.
Yeah, and then the argument now I find is the corn, does it even exist out there, all this carryover corn? You're going to find a lot of arguments on both sides. I think it does. But we don't know for sure. Are farmers just that tight-fisted? And are the USDA's numbers right with beans as well? Or does this not exist, only on paper? And you'll find that you'll see this argument for the rest of the year, what's out there, what's not out there. The prices are going to tell you, right now they're not worried about it. They think it's out there. So until you see like nationwide firming basis and just more signs of it, I think you have to assume these numbers are what the market's going to trade for quite a while.
Do you see any opportunities in spreads? Any spreads that you're watching specifically off this, or? Yeah,
quite a few. Okay, so guys kind of give up on these kinds of markets. Goes down, there's nothing to do, and they think very directionally. But if you don't think the corn's out there, you have all these spreads in the back end that are in the front end, for that matter, that they're widening out to very wide carries already. I think it was 14 cents between December and March. The one I've got my eye on is May, July. That's been an inverted spread. Not last year. That actually was at 13-cent carry. But in the previous years, heavily inverted May over July. So, instead of, what you need to do is embrace, hey, if it's not out there, what are some strategies that I can look at that are maybe not as risky as outright long or short? You want to look at the deferred bull spreads in beans and corn, again, depending on your beliefs. And then if you're on the bear side of stuff, You have all kinds of well, I shouldn't say that. After the report, a lot of the inversions left. I think November 24 was still inverted over 25 beans. You have some inversions remaining. July 25 corn was over 20. July 25 was over December 25 corn. That inversion disappeared after the report, but I think it was closer to zero. It might have been -2 today if I saw it right. So if you're a bear, you have some of these deferred spreads still have a lot of carry to be put in. And if you're a bull, you have some of these deferred spreads that you'd want to look at and get ready to buy. Maybe not buy them today, but look at, hey, when it gets to maybe 10 cents carry, I'm looking at May versus July corn because I don't believe it's out there. So these are the little strategies that I look for if you don't want to go off the USDA's numbers, but you don't want to take a lot of risk. Of course, spreads can be riskier than outright positions, but when you're talking corn, that's unlikely, and it's not old crop, new crop. It's it's new crop. So instead of fighting this and saying there's nothing to do and just giving up, I tend to look for all these spreads and the opportunities that they present. Today I got in a bull spread for beans. I don't recommend that. I just kind of saw that it was losing today and I jumped in. I think that the old crop beans might be supportive, but that could change tomorrow. So it's the time of year where you can't count on any bull spreads following through. Like there could be a bunch of cash beans in the pipeline suddenly over the weekend, and then the front collapses, or China could cancel cargoes, the front collapses. So it's kind of a dicey time of year. The July, November, as it went off the board, worked very well. So if you think there's no beans out there, some of the old crop, new crop stuff might still work, but highly unpredictable when it comes to the last of the old crop stuff. So definitely not a recommendation, because this stuff, again, 1 minute the basis in the cash market's good, the next minute your neighbors and everybody else sells and everything collapses. So it's hard to know what's out there. Everybody kind of fibs out what they need and what's out there. And then in 2.5 weeks, maybe 3 weeks from now, no one's going to care about old crop anymore. Although I think 2 years ago, there was a pretty good squeeze in September, November beans. It just becomes the time of year where it fades. The old crop talk and the old crop cash markets kind of fade out of conversation. And then it's only new crop and the new crop focus. And that's where generally the secondary fall happens, like late July going into August. Sometimes it pauses at this time of year and then has another leg lower. That's the big question that I'm trying to figure out is, are we trying to find bottoms now, or are we just pausing before larger moves down, which is not uncommon at all in the summer?
So either way, it seems that we're kind of pausing here, maybe consolidating in some fashion. How does that affect option strategies right now? I would assume we're heading into a little lower volatility, maybe.
Terrible for long options. When you start stalling out, going up a little bit, going down a little bit, that's the last thing you want to see if you're long puts. If you're long calls, obviously it's not good for that either. If you're an option seller selling volatility, that's what that's normally what you want to do this time of year. Corn is notorious for all the volatility draining out in July time period as it pollinates, and it's not as worried about it anymore. The premium just seems to bleed out of those calls. There's not a lot of premium to get, and that's been the problem for a long time. I mean, who wants to sell an October 450 for 10 cents? You got an awful lot of time. You got all that risk exposure for $500, best case scenario. You could have a frost. You could have more widespread flooding. I mean, a lot of things could happen. So the risk versus reward is horrible this year for that stuff. Last year, the volatility spiked a tremendous amount, and there was all kinds of wonderful opportunities. This year just did not present that. And also on the downside, if you're a put owner, you're not making much money either, because it's just simply not moving fast enough. There's not enough fear in the market, and the option price is just it's not fun for an options guy right now, because there's just not a lot of action. I think is a good way to sum it up. It's just kind of a quieter than normal market in the summer.
Yeah, I think if you want to be long options, it's going to become a timing thing.
Yeah.
When's the next move? What's the next thing that might come in?
Oh, I agree.
You got to time that, and if you don't time it right, you're going to lose all that.
Without a doubt, I'm going to be interested in some of these cheap calls that will be out there, especially, as we see harvest pressure. But, timing, like you say, like, does it do you any good to set in a $5 March call right now and pay too much? I think they're 10, 11 cents. Odds are the premium's going to bleed out a little more, and you're going to be able to get it cheaper. And do you just want to sit in and watch it do nothing forever and tie money up? So things can change fast, but still, I am going to be interested in that, in looking at call options this year because the price is lower, especially in corn. And, you can argue about what the flooding did, what that's going to do, the cool weather. That'll all show up later. But it just, at this time of year, I feel like it's getting ahead of, oneself doing that. But you never know. I mean, you could end up buying calls and in next week they could turn it into the heat dome of death and everything could be flying higher. You can't give up on the weather markets yet. But as everybody's seeing it trade, it doesn't look like there's a lot of fear there.
Well, and that's something I've heard mentioned quite a bit recently. There is flooding in the Minnesota, Iowa, South Dakota border area. There's some flooding around. I know I-90 had flooding across it in Minnesota. And
yep.
I hear a lot of people complain that that's not being reflected. Oh, it wasn't in the USDA report, or it wasn't in. Well, these things, one, take time, and two, drier affects markets faster than wetter or flooding.
Yeah, it's really hard to measure, and it gets to be really personal because it actually happens to your farm and it's affecting your income, and it's very real. It's where if it's drier and it's affecting your farm, then one rain can change everything. Flooding's different that way, where it can ruin a crop, and what you get is a low price and no crop. It's not a fun scenario at all. So it tends to be a more personal thing, and it does really affect people. There's no doubt. No one argues that. I mean, it's going to affect many farms and many acres, but how to measure it and how to put that in the pricing right now, pretty much impossible for this time of year. And the funds want to be short. They're not going to care about this. And historically, it just doesn't show up. It's not measured very well by the USDA, the way they do their calculations. We've seen this in 2009 and 2019. What cool years. On paper, a lot of grains existed, and then a year and a half later, they find out those numbers weren't anywhere near reality. So it tends to be exceedingly slow and a tedious process. And it doesn't even show up in the numbers. Where it shows up is in basis and the price kind of coming up. And it just has this different feeling like there's not a lot out there. But it takes a long time, a year and a half. So we might have a repeat of 2009, where this shows up a lot later. But what's different this year is it's only half of the growing region. It's going to be the western half. Parts of Iowa, obviously very important. But then the east has not got enough rain, and they've been very warm. So very different weather patterns for the eastern and western corn belt.
Excellent. You had mentioned heat units. Usually you don't hear about them till July. It's July 2nd today, so you might as well talk about them. But, I mean, it has been cool here in Minnesota. It's been hot in the eastern corn belt, as you said.
Yep.
What are we looking for from a heat side? Just for me, we have a week at the lake next week. I sure hope it gets hot. It hasn't felt hot. We need that for growing crops.
Yeah, it's like
right now, right?
72, 79. You get a lot of these days. Not a lot in the 80s. It all looks good. It looks like a movie around here. It looks very, very good. But it also looks like, it's knee high in the 4th of July. I mean, it actually lived up to the saying. That's an old saying, and with the corn and the way it's been growing, it's usually head high by the 4th of July nowadays. But it is truly knee high in a lot of spots on the 4th of July. And then we don't know what the September weather brings. You can be behind. Like the September last year we had was exceedingly warm, and the plant would have done very well if it was behind in September last year, because I think it was 80 degrees for most of September. And I remember that because our air conditioning was out, and I thought it would be fine. It kind of went out at the very end of August, and I thought it'd be fine, and it wasn't really fine. We had a lot of fans in here. And I had to get my heating and AC replaced. And that's my next trip, actually. I got my invoice in the mail, and a personal friend of mine. And he sent me an invoice. So I would think that he probably wants to get paid. So it's went into friendship, into more business side with an invoice. So I am going to get in the car and go pay him today. But I do remember September being very, very warm. And but that's also a danger. What if it's very, very cool? And we have a shortened season this year. That's the kind of thing where selling a 450 to October call seems like a really bad idea. Yeah, if we get a very cool back half of August and September, that would not be good for us up here at all. So don't rule out the weather markets yet. But I mean, look at the price action today. I mean, it's snoozeville. Beans looked exciting. What were they, up 15 overnight? And then pretty soon they're unchanged. I think we maybe ended up 1 or 2, maybe. There's just nobody willing to buy on the speculation side right now. And the funds are in control of the short side. And there's not a lot of news. Very bad combination. But it looks like we're going to warm up. It looks like 80s by the 10th. And if it stays that way in July, which it normally does, things will get back on track.
Makes sense. Well, it actually is almost 80 outside. It's 4th of July week. I think we're both anxious to get out and enjoy that. Anything else you want to add this week?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of things to do this time of year. I'm going to wait till past the 4th of July weekend, see more weather. But this is where the market falls and everybody just hangs it up. They just kick dirt. It's done. And I'll just see, I'll wait till spring for better prices. Actually, this gets to be one of the better times of the year for opportunities. There's not a lot of clarity, short term, but like I said, some of the deferred spreads aren't done, and there's lots to look at. But guys tend to give up this time of year, and they get busy, as everybody does, and it's a big mistake. So if you want to hear about some of the stuff we're doing, definitely give me a call, because, like I say, it's one of the better times of year to actually be in the markets.
Excellent. And how do they reach you?
218-731-1578.
Thanks, John.
Yep. So officially tubing season.
Tubing weather. Going tubing next week.
Tubing and wakeboarding weather.